Dave here. Thank you for joining me for another edition of No BS Reactions. This is me checking out some music I've never heard before, a lot of it by suggestion, just to expand my boundaries and learn a little bit more out there. Yeah, I'm known for the progressive rock and metal interviews and the music that I play on my station and all that. And this is me pushing my own boundaries outside of where I'm normally used to being, stretching my comfort zone ever so slightly so I can, hey, learn a little bit more here and there. And admittedly, what I'll be learning a bit more about today is a band that I actually should have known more about ages ago, that being Meshuggah. This will be actually me finishing a trilogy of Meshuggah music, going back to Bleed, which was the first one I did. And if you haven't seen those videos, yeah, hey, go back, check them out if you want to before you watch this, and you can kind of see my progression of getting familiar with them. But they're a band that has been highly influential in the world of progressive metal and even progressive rock for artists that I have listened to for years and didn't even know they were into Meshuggah, such as Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree. Yeah, totally different music, and yet Meshuggah is a band that has influenced him. And there are bands that I can see the direct line a little more clearly, such as Tesseract and Periphery and Between the Buried and Me and Animals as Leaders, that I've listened to regularly. And admittedly, I blew off Meshuggah for not fully understanding what they were, and also for the fact that I'm not a big fan of harsh vocals. So that always kind of put me off a little bit and kept me from really digging into them. I've never been a big fan of the screams and the growls and all that, but I've come to have an appreciation for some of that stuff at this point in time. And at the same time, I still much prefer it when my songs have at least 50% clean vocals. Something I'm still working through. This may be about as far as I ever get with it, but you can thank Opeth for getting me close to that there. So what we're going to be listening to today is from their latest album, Immutable, that came out last year, and that song is called The Abysmal Eye. Admittedly, it was not a recommendation from one of the viewers, but one I picked out myself just because I had done two songs from one album, which was going back a ways, and felt I wanted to sort of see where they progressed to when we look at something more recent, because I've certainly have read snippets of reviews and things like that that really had a lot of very positive things to say about their last couple of albums. So I kind of want to see, let's see what's different. Let's see how things may have changed since the album from the first two songs I listened to. So here we go. Meshuggah, The Abysmal Eye. Buckle up. All right, so I'm going to pause that right there because I'm almost certain the vocals are about to start. Just my sense of timing for this. But I love this opening. This is very cool, very heavy, very chunky and genty, and it's kind of thing I enjoy in some of those other bands I mentioned. And I like it, and I especially like, the pummeling rhythms of it, but then they layer in these keyboards or organ or whatever. It's keyboards either way. And I thought that was a nice touch because it's not, up to this point, something I've heard a lot in their music, and I like hearing the application of it here. I love that little bit of almost just, kind of laying on the chords. They're not changing much, not quite ambient, but I like that bit of atmosphere it adds to the whole thing, and that contrast to the guitars and the drums, just and then there's just this keyboard in the background, and yet it's keyboard that still sounds menacing in that sense, which, all right, guys, if you're going to do it, commit to it, and that's one thing they do. All right, continuing.
This man is sacred.
Interesting. Very, as usual with them, very dark lyrics. Not quite sure what I think they were getting at. It's the idea of something we created that destroyed us, and yet can't help but get this whole kind of Cthulhu vibe from it, the Lovecraft type imagery at times. And maybe the video influenced that a little bit. But, they definitely did what this gets back a little bit more to the first video I did with Meshuggah, Bleed, in which they found this groove and they stuck with that pretty solidly. They are not a band, I think, that does a lot in terms of like great changes in tempo and tone. They don't go from real quiet to real soft to real loud and pummeling to slow to these big crescendos that I sometimes am used to hearing when it comes to a lot of progressive type rock and things like that. It's a matter of they find their groove and they stick with that pretty much for the song without a lot of changes there. It's all very complex music. And especially as I'm learning, the idea that the guitars and such may be playing one time signature and the drummer's playing another time signature simultaneously, which was mind blowing to me, that people can pull that kind of thing off. And it's just the way the music is constructed and composed. It is complex as well. And that's them. That's what they do. And the dark lyrics, basically nihilistic, I guess is the best way of putting it. And the idea that things could be meaningless or that everything is going to destruction or we're going to destroy ourselves or something like that. It's fairly standard in my mind, Meshuggah, as I've heard it, but then again, that's 2 out of 3 songs. So it's very similar to the first one. It's probably a better way of putting it. I hate to say something as standard like that, but I get the impression that's pretty typical of them, that they have a bit of a groove metal tendency as well as their kind of progressive, djenty tendencies. The guitar solo this time around, whereas the last one, Dancers to a Discordant, darn it, I forgot the last word now. We'll get back to it. But that song had a very melodic, proggy kind of guitar solo to it that seemed very much in counterpoint to the rest of the song, where the rest of the song was closer to this. Then there was like this slower midsection or this less aggressive midsection and this guitar solo that I'm not even sure he used much distortion on it, but it was something that sounded like could have been lifted out of a song by Camel or Genesis or Marillion or something like that. It just seemed out of place, and yet the contrast to me was so very cool. This one, if my ears didn't deceive me, was a finger-tapped one and tended to keep a similar tempo and a similar pace throughout, rather than changing up. And it didn't change and bring in different styles or techniques to the solo. It pretty much found its groove like a lot of the song did and went with the finger tapping or something that sounded like that to me. Not a guitar player, but all I could say was in listening to it, it was bringing to mind Eddie Van Halen, to say to really say the easy one. And that's the thought it was giving me. So we're back to this thing where on an instrumental level, I can dig a lot of what Meshuggah is doing. And the vocals, something occurred to me in the midst of this as well. And it strikes me in some ways, I wonder, and I could be wrong, somebody out there that maybe does this kind of music can confirm or refute this kind of pondering on my part, whether or not those kind of harsh vocals make it easier to create the vocals because you're not bound by necessarily, in my ear anyway, the time signature or the tempo or the phrasing as heavily as you would be a song where you've got to blend it into a musical harmony or melody, and you got to stick with the key and all that. Whereas this one, it sort of frees one up to create a much more a less restricted prose in the lyrics. and therefore he can say things the way he wants to, or phrase them the way, because it's poetry in its own way. All lyrics are really. So it's a form of very dark poetry, and the meter and the timing and all that may or may not necessarily fit well in a traditional song format, but with what they're doing with the vocals here, maybe that gives some more freedom to say things the way they want to say them. Because I mean, bringing up some of these lyrics, some of it strikes me as, wow, like these things I can imagine being hard to fit into more standard meter and phrasing that you would need for songs, like with covetous verve and credulity. Credulity in itself, what a word to have to try and probably sing to a melody. Jesus. Pandora's quantum prism. Actually kind of flows nicely when you say it out loud. The great disimaginer. Like, these are phrases that I would imagine more traditional lyricists or songwriters would have trouble fitting into the more traditional vocal patterns and fitting it into a melody and a rhythm. Whereas as he's screaming it, he seems to be more free to not have to adhere strictly to the pace and the rhythm and the time signature of the music, much less the melody. Not that their music is exceedingly melodic. It's mostly very, very aggressive and almost dissonant more than it is melodic. When I say almost, I probably mean it is. My tendency towards understatement. So anyway, like the Meshuggah I've heard so far, there's a lot of this instrumentally that I really dig. There's aspects of it when you add the vocals that aren't as much for me. And so it kind of feels like I'm still in that same place with them, where I can't say I would fully commit to say I'm going to throw this on my playlist and these guys are going to become part of what I normally listen to. But I think because of what I've heard, I remain hopeful that may eventually happen. Possibly I may find that Meshuggah song that really, really does it for me. Dancers to a Discordant System, remembered it. I have to go back to and check that out again, because of the three, that's what I've liked the best. And I think this one probably comes in a close second or just ahead of Bleed. But some pretty cool stuff. So it's been fun digging into Meshuggah and learning more about them. So I appreciate all the feedback, the education, and the suggestions people have had for this. Keep them coming. If you've got other things similar to this you think I would dig, send them my way. Let me get a chance to hear some of this stuff, and we'll see what happens. You never know. I'm going to find something I really love eventually here. I think, at least I feel confident that'll happen out of all of this. So thank you once again for joining me for this. I appreciate it if you've watched this far. If you don't mind, hit the like and the subscribe and the bell. Do that thing. Links for the social media are below, as is the link for my station on Live 365. It's called The Expanse. It's all progressive rock and metal all day. And hey, if you want to check out my other stuff, the interviews and other various things Prog related are on this channel. Or if you want to hear my interviews in audio format, just search out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. It's all there. It's all cool if you want to join me along for this fun little ride of my music tastes. So thanks again for joining me. This is Super Dave, signing off.